to introduce our speaker this morning. We have our own sort of trifecta here this morning in terms of Kahila interests. We have bicycling, which of course is the lead interest of a number of members, and I thank them for being here instead of being on a bicycle ride somewhere. We also have science and the environment. So our speaker this morning is Dr. David Goodrich. He, in terms of his he's retired now. In terms of his scientific background, he worked at NOAA for many, many years, ended up being the director of the Climate Observation Division for NOAA. He also, I don't know whether he's working for NOAA or he left, but he was also served as the director of the Global Climate Observing System at the World Meteorological Organization in Geneva. Now, when he was not doing that, he was also learning how to bicycle somewhere along the way, perhaps when he was younger. And after he retired, he rode his bike from Delaware all the way to Oregon, and doing a little biking, enjoying the scenery, but also observing what was happening with climate change, talking to people about climate change. And as a result, he's written a book, which will be coming out in May, called A Hole in the Wind. So he's going to be talking about that. Also, most recently, if we run out of time talking about climate, he can talk about his most recent bicycle trip, where he started in New Orleans, rode up the Mississippi River at sort of a blues tour of the Mississippi Delta, ending up in where?
Clarksdale, Mississippi.
Clarksdale, Mississippi. So,
oh, okay.
So, in any event, so I'm very pleased to introduce Dave.
Yeah, it's a bit like Old Home Week for me. I mean, sort of discovering as getting all mic'd up here that the gentleman that was preparing the video for me, Arlindo, that we are old colleagues. He was at University of Wisconsin and now at NASA. I also, when I was writing the book, I did all of my writing or all of the review work at the Writer Center in Bethesda, where my group was, I think I was the only Gentile in the group. They basically was a very supportive group of people that, you know, you give them a draft, they beat it up, and they say, you know, come back with something a little better, give us, and things do get better in the writing process from there. As Mark was saying, I do a lot of writing. I want to, and very, very kind introduction, I want to give my biggest credential here as to the talk. I have been designated as a really big nerd by a 9-year-old girl, my daughter. This was a Father's Day. This was a Father's Day card from the early 90s. She's now a professor at McGill, so she's a really big nerd. I throw this at her all the time, and it's the big lesson here is never leave a paper trail. So anyway, a couple of stuff on almost what I was thinking about as I was organizing it today. When I rode across, one of the things I discovered very quickly, you're not riding in big cities. You're really trying to avoid them. As I went across, Cincinnati was the only big city I rode through, and I discovered the first day out, I rode to Sharpsburg, which is right by the Antietam battlefield. It was pouring rain. I didn't want to pitch the tent that night, and I called up this B&B, and I said, "Can I stay there tonight? I mean, I'm under an awning as the water's pouring down. It's dark." And she says, "Sure, okay, but we're not there." I said, "Okay, how do I get in?" "The key's right by the door." I said, "Okay. Do you have Wi-Fi?" "Well, you can pick up Wi-Fi off the firehouse sometimes." "Okay." how do I pay you? She said, oh, could you just leave the money on the table? And I said, of course I can. You know, doesn't everybody? It's like I had immediately transformed into small town America, and that was where I was going to be for the next 3 months. And I found it very encouraging going across that I ran into all of these, as they say here, kind and weird people. Almost exclusively kind, sometimes weird. The title for the book, A Hole in the Wind, was, you know, I was thinking, oh man, I got to get across the Rockies and the Cascades and stuff, and those are going to be real killers. And it turned out that the hardest state was Kansas, because I'm riding westbound. It's the same you know, direction of the Pioneers. It was, you know, all romantic and everything, but I was getting, you know, 30, 40 mile an hour winds some days, headwinds and crosswinds, and I was getting killed. And what I wanted more than anything was to find, you know, early morning, a hole in the wind that I could pour some miles into, because I would be just, in the big winds, I'd be riding 3 miles, stop, drink, and do, you know, repeat many times over the course of the day. Also, from the climate side of things, I was observing some things that seem obvious to you from a distance, but aren't necessarily so. And it's almost like connecting the dots on climate going across the country. And have some comments on where those climate dots point at the end. And I want to close it. You know, sometimes these, you know, the climate talks tend to be very depressing. And I really believe that there is a case for hope. We saw it on the streets of DC last week. Hopefully we'll see it in a week from now. But it's not at all, you know, perhaps not as dark as it seems. For riding, this was the route across in 2011, and a couple of places along the way. I started with a 3-day stint to get to the beach. You know, you got to dip your tires on both ends. And a couple of places I'll talk about, Pine Hook Beach in Delaware. Tunkhannock is right in the middle of the fracking region that I was going across. Jeffrey City, in the category of kind and weird people, the kindest and weirdest there are. Glacier Park in Montana was not on this trip, but was actually last summer. And then Cameron Pass in Colorado was another of the places I'll mention. It averaged about 60 miles a day, and you know, something like 2,000 feet of climbing, but it's kind of weird to average Kansas and Colorado in the same number. But and just so you know, that was in 2011. But all these other little colored lines, I try to do a big ride every year, and the some short, some not so short. Probably the most recent, the magenta one, was going up going to the Sun Road in Glacier Park. And one that's not even on here was the one from New Orleans up the Mississippi Valley. So I like to do some long rides, and sometimes I think I've figured it out. The climate side of things is probably, I'll mention this kind of briefly for this audience, because I think folks have a pretty good idea of this. The idea that climate change is very definitely for real, and you know, you hear people say, well, it snowed last week. It's like, no, just keep an idea. Climate is an average. Doesn't mean you're never going to have winter anymore. It's never going to be cold, but it's going to be less so. The idea that it's really controversial among scientists is something that is a creature of the media and not of the scientific literature. And you hear people saying, well, you know, the vast number of emissions are coming from China, that China's the problem. And you start saying, well, okay, per person, we've got China, you know, the US has China beat by something like 3-1 anyway. So a lot of the issues start here with leadership in the US. and the idea of transforming from a carbon-based economy and just simply using less energy. I got to, when I was working for World Meteorological Organization in Geneva, kind of got used to the European lifestyle and the idea that you are that the Europeans have a worse lifestyle than we do. It's like, no, not that close. But they use a lot less energy, so it's possible to do that. Anyway, starting east to west, a place near the start of the ride. This is a Prime Hook Beach in Delaware. I actually started the ride up at Cape Henlopen, and this is like around the corner from Cape Henlopen, and it's a low barrier island, maybe a little lower than most, but not so much. And you can see that in a lot of cases, high tide line comes right up to the dunes or thereabouts. And what you can see, if you look at Prime Hook Beach from space, you look at the Prime Hook is actually down here a little bit. This is the next barrier island up from Prime Hook, and you can see where there have been big breaches in this island. This is called Fowler Beach. The island looks kind of like Swiss cheese. This island is not even inhabited anymore. When you go to take a look at it from ground level, you find things like a guardrail hanging into space, and you realize there used to be a lot less or a lot more land here than there was. This is a classic coastal erosion problem, and you look at the basic reason behind it is that sea level has been rising for quite a while. It is a consistent pattern up and down the East Coast, with some places where the land subsidence is greater than others. I would advise not investing in real estate in Norfolk, Virginia Beach right now. You have significant rates of subsidence in New Orleans. They're losing something like a football field a day in the Louisiana Delta. So you combine the net sea level trends with let's say storms are what they've always been, that there's no change in storms. That's not necessarily true, but you're still going to get big storms like Sandy. This is you know how your kids never listen to you? It's kind of like universal. My son lived in Lower Manhattan, and I was calling him the day before Sandy, and I said, you really need to get comfortable with a couple of feet of water in your street, because that's what's going down here. And he said, okay, yeah, but we're gonna stay. And of course, Lower Manhattan was blacked out. This was a photograph from right down his street in Lower Manhattan. Was one of places where a lot of cars got washed into the entrance to a parking garage. And so this is the pattern that we've seen, that we'll continue to see, that you have a rising sea level on top of some big swings from storms. You can make the argument that storms have become more intense, not necessarily more of them, but it's, and I also feel especially nervous because I've got, a big-time climate scientist in the audience. Arlindo saying, oh, but so I really gotta watch the fibs I tell, even more than to my family. But the general notion of you have a rising sea level on top of big swings coming from storms is a pattern that is going to continue. We are going to see more Sandys. You're pretty much guaranteed. Can't say when, but it's happening. Now, the gentleman that introduced me, Mark, has been instrumental in getting the fracking ban passed in the Maryland legislature. I'd like to mention to you a little bit of why that's a big deal. because on a couple of my rides, I've been through the fracking region of Pennsylvania. I met a woman by the name of Emily Kraftjack, who is lives on a place called Nimble Hill in Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania. All of her neighbors basically signed leases for drilling. It's one of the Marcellus Shale is enormously productive from the perspective of methane. And she said, everybody else has signed, and all that's going to happen if I don't sign is they'll just drill up to my property line and take whatever gas is under my property anyway. So she said, maybe I can make this work. Maybe I can, that gas drilling is going to be around. As she said, shale gas is here, let's try and make it work. She actually was on a committee for the Pennsylvania state government and tried to work on best practices for gas drilling for the fracking operations. Her tales are of trucks lined up her street, just the idling from diesel gas, that there are big ponds of drilling waste that they keep around. You see these all through the fracking region. At one point they actually had fountains in the middle of these waste pools because they want to reduce the amount that they have to truck away. So basically they're putting all of the stuff that's in the fracking compounds into the air. People with asthma, like Emily, could not even walk outside the house. Basically had to keep the house buttoned up while they were drilling, and they were doing a lot of drilling. So it's conversion of a rural part of Pennsylvania into an industrial zone. Emily says, I'm from my family's coal people. We know what it's what extractive industries are like, and that coal brought a lot of good things to Pennsylvania as well as some of the difficulties. But she says the industry that was supposed to come with the fracking industry never happened. And as she said, that for an awful lot of companies, they just don't care unless they get caught. Ultimately, the recommendations of her advisory committee just got canned. They said, oh, this is all about government regulations. We can't do that. And basically her work on this was lost. So it's a rough business. Okay, the other thing that I would do, the major thing in the course of my days riding is that by the end of the afternoon, about 3 o'clock, I'm looking for ice cream, okay? And this was like an oasis in Pennsylvania, the Youghigheny Valley. This is the Yacht Twister stand. It's like, oh, all right, here we go. Later on, I found twisters in a town called Hermann, Missouri. I was riding through Missouri the day after Joplin. Some of you folks might remember, this was when an EF5 tornado hit the city of Joplin, Missouri, and did a pretty good job of blowing things away. There was a lady I spoke with. She said, "Yeah, I was tending bar, and the whole building starts to shake, and you hear this freight train kind of noise, and then it's gone. And then I open the door, look across the street, and it's matchsticks." So I was riding through Missouri. I stopped off at a friendly McDonald's where everybody was looking at the TV screen. We're in the days of extreme weather centers. This was kind of like a real extreme weather center. There were reds and orange blotches all over the Doppler on the screens, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, could get nasty tonight." I was in the nastiest motel of the whole trip. It's like you don't even. The lights didn't work real well in the room, and it was just as well because nasty. But it was made of brick. I like that. It's like I don't want to be camping tonight. And then the next day, I rode to Hermann. This was the picture is of, I stopped because the forecast was bad, and I went out to this nice winery, had a nice lunch, you know, and I asked the lady, I said, I hear there's some tornado warnings around. Am I going to be okay walking back into town? And she says, I'll check the Doppler. And somebody from the next room says, oh, there's one touching down in Sedalia. She says, oh, Sedalia is a long way away. You'll be fine. It's like, oh, okay. And I'm walking back into town, and it's, you know, the sky is all kind of twisted up. There are these cumulus, the scalloped looking clouds. And then the siren goes off. It's like, I think I know what this is about. And I start trotting around, and it's a wine town. So I had scouted out things ahead of time, and a wine cellar, the perfect place to ride out the storm, you know, with a bunch of friendly drunks. And you know, the lady said, she said, you don't have a wine glass. She trotted upstairs to get me once, like that's an emergency. And so we're getting, you know, the cell phone reception's a little sketchy, and she said, oh, well, okay, it's touched down in the field, it looks like it's picked up, I think, yeah, I don't think it's going to be in town. And you know, by the time, you know, whatever the all clear sounded like, it's like, you know, the town was still standing and we were still standing, but it was kind of a near thing on both counts. Anyway, there's some good ways to get by tornadoes. Going across into Kansas, the you know, I talked about the kind and weird people. I was going into the wind for just days on days on days, and in a town called Tribune, Kansas, I'm in the only motel for 20 miles, and you know how people kind of look like their dogs after a while? I'm not sure which, you know, or the other way around. Either way, the guy who ran the motel, you know, he looked like his dog was right there. Very, very kind guy. I said, look, I only need two things. I need a hot shower, and I'd like to have Wi-Fi. I said, oh, absolutely. And so I go trotting out to the room. I'm exhausted. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm done for the day. And this is the only place to stay. I kind of kick the tumbleweed away from the door, and you know, it's a small room, but nice hot shower, and then I look for Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi is not there. And it's like, I'm pretty beat, but I go up to the front desk. I said, you know, you got a problem with Wi-Fi out in this room out here? And he kind of rubs his chin. So I go back, and I pass out on the bed. I'm gone. And the sound that I hear is a grinding over my head. And I wake up, it's like, I don't know where I am, but it's like, there is something coming through the wall. There is something coming through the wall. It's not a dream. It's like, okay, what are my defenses? You know, I got a Swiss Army knife, I got a little pepper spray, and I'm in my underwear, and a little piece of plaster pops out of the wall, and there's a drill bit, and then a wire comes down. It's an Ethernet cable. Anyway, and then a voice from the other side says, "Do you okay?" It's like, yeah, okay. You know, and my laptop is, you know, good enough. It's sort of back in the days of Ethernet cables. So, but it was like, okay, that was nice, but. This is kind of what Kansas was like going across. Kansas was in the middle of a drought, and drought is something that the plains have dealt with for a long time. There have been many worse droughts than we've had in the history of recent inhabitants of the Great Plains. Climate change tilts things more towards drought, especially in the center of continents. When I was there, it was about a 2-year drought. There were fires going on. This was the Wallow Fire in Arizona was going, and what would be a nice clear day we had plenty of smoke drifting over from fires 1,000 miles away in Arizona. That's in a lot of ways shape of things to come. getting to the mountains, I was figuring that I was pretty well acclimatized. You know, you have this gradual climb from 200 odd feet on one side of Kansas to you're almost at a mile high in eastern Colorado. I was in back of Fort Collins, Colorado, is the entrance to one of the entrances to the Rockies, a place called Poudre Canyon, and the Rockies are like a 2-day climb for a bike, and my first day was about 2,500 feet of climbing, pretty steady. I got close to where my campground was going to be, and there's this lady kind of out cutting brush, and she kind of looks up and says, could you use some water? I said, well, yes, actually. And the water turns into margaritas, and I was kind of lucky to that the campground was only about a quarter mile around the way. She and her sisters were the ladies of the canyon, and this was the way up, the way the canyon looked. Pretty steady uphill climb, gorgeous, a big river coming down, moose by the side of the road. Was pretty spectacular. By the time I got up, the summit at Cameron Pass is at about 10:02, and I was, despite whatever the picture looks like, I was pretty toasted. You're way up close to the clouds, and there was a lot of snow up there. It was a big snow year, not unlike this year. But I looked around, it's like something's strange here. And you look around in the high pass, it's not like the trees are in trouble or there's some diseased trees. The trees are basically all dead. And the culprit here, I had heard of this, but I hadn't seen it, is the mountain pine beetle. It's a bug that used to get killed over the winter when it drops down to 20, 30 below, and they don't have winters that drop to 20 to 30 below anymore. The larvae of the mountain pine beetle can overwinter, and the population just exploded. You've got 40 million acres up the spine of the Rockies into British Columbia of forests that are dead or dying. If this happened in a month or in a couple of weeks, it would have been front page news all over the country. But it happened relatively slowly over a period of 5-10 years. There's still some places where high altitude forests where the bugs are moving in, but they are moving in. You could see around where I was that there was salvage logging going on. There are lots of dead trees. They're taking them down. You could find bundles of firewood from beetle-killed pine on the way up. So I was in Colorado Outward Bound when I was right out of college, and it's like the high forests are completely changed now. The real estate agents talk about emerging view lots. It's like, well, okay, yeah, that's true. The views are better. The chapter 2 of Kind and Weird People, going across Wyoming, the thing that had been on my mental bulletin board was that there's a 120-mile stretch of no grocery stores, no motels. You have to have camping gear. This was what the landscape looked like. You're in high sagebrush country. You're right along the Oregon Trail. You can still see some of the wagon ruts on the Oregon Trail, but you're up high and the weather's real close. When I was kind of coming over a piece of the Continental Divide, and I see this, big storm up ahead, and it's like, okay, I'll just slow down and I'll let that storm move across. And it's like, and it did. It's like, oh, that was pretty smart. And it's like, that was the baby. Mama was right behind it, and Mama was not happy. Mama was looking around for me. And on a bike, you got, there's no shelter there. You're up high, and you can smell the ozone from the lightning. And you just want to get away from your bike, get away from anything metal, get as low as you can, and just kind of ball up on the side of the road and get drenched. And kind of listen to the cattle are kind of upset too. I mean, you hear the cattle, and so you get drenched and then just sort of wring yourself out and finish driving. So I was really interested in finding a place to hang out. There was supposed to be this town, Jeffrey City, and Jeffrey City is a uranium ghost town. There used to be uranium mines there. They closed basically after 3 Mile Island. There are only about 50 souls left in town. And I'm looking at my odometer, so it's supposed to be a town here. I kind of need some water would be good. But it turns out there is a town. Went to the Split Rock Cafe. It's a little restaurant. And I say, I'm going to come back here for dinner, but I've heard you could camp in town. And she says, I think the trailer's open tonight. Why don't you check with Byron, right across the street? It's like, well, okay. So this is Byron. Byron is the Mad Potter of Jeffrey City. He runs a pottery studio in an abandoned gas station across the street. And Byron says, oh yeah, we got a nice trailer here. This is the abandoned gas station, and that's the trailer. It's got dolphins painted on the side of it. It was princely abode. And he said, you can stay there. And there are also lots of these other people around the table. These are also long distance cyclists, because Jeffrey City is the only place to stop. And as the afternoon went on, more and more people kind of accumulated. So we had a nice little group at the cafe. One of the other people took. I was really glad to be in the trailer, because one of the other people took a picture of, that's their tent pole and a rattlesnake outside next to it. But as the night went on, Byron lights off a fire in a 55-gallon drum, and we're all kind of gathered around, and it's pitch dark, and central Wyoming, the land is almost without a light, and the sky is lit up. I mean, the Milky Way is right there, and we're passing around a bottle. We're having a good time. This does sound like a drinking tour of North America, but anyway. But so we're doing pretty good, and on the horizon there are a couple of lights, and Byron, across the fire, Byron's eyes get wide, and he says, all right, here we go. And he runs off into the studio. And we're kind of going, this is getting weird. And he comes back. He's a potter. He's made these giant Polynesian war masks. He's got a Polynesian war mask and a pitchfork. And as the car is coming by, he's jumping up and down with the pitchfork. And the car kind of slows a little bit, swerves, and then just guns it to the horizon. And he says, all right, out-of-state plates too, it works. It's like, okay. It's like, this is the amusement in Jeffrey City. But it was, they're a pretty neat bunch. There's a group called Adventure Cycling, and they I ended up nominating them to the Trail Angel Award for people that help out touring cyclists. So, but that's Jeffrey City. Went up into Montana, and a couple of almost the two sides of climate change that you run into. One of them early in 2000. One of the big changes that's happening in the Northern Rockies is fire. We've got about 6 times more large fires than in the 1970s. This was a photograph. I didn't take this one. This was I think, a photograph of the year from Time in 2000 with the deer in the Bitterroot River. This was the big Bitterroot fires, and I was actually riding across through the Bitterroot Valley in 2000. you come around the corner and there's a little, little triangular sign propped up by sandbags in the road says forest fire ahead. It's like, okay, and you come around the corner and it's like World War III. The fire had already gone through, but there were still there were fire crews there from Australia. Big fires are happening. They're more common out west than they have been. It's in part a result of the fire suppression that took place earlier this century, where it's like we want to put out every fire, but it also has a tremendous amount to do that it is it's a lot warmer than it has been, and the fire season now extends for several more months than it used to. The other side of things that's almost the people have recognized as poster child for climate change. Last summer, I rode through Glacier on the Going to the Sun Road, Glacier National Park. I ran into guy Bob Schuster, who was celebrating his 50th anniversary at Glacier Park, and he gives a talk about climate change and the glaciers going across. One of the things from like the 1920s, when they were trying to promote people coming to stay at the hotels, was like, come see our natural air conditioning, all our glaciers. So they had pictures of all the glaciers in Glacier National Park, and the Geological Survey went back to find the exact spot where those pictures were taken in the early 2000s. And here, one of the most prominent glaciers is Grinnell, and you can see it was a pretty big river of ice. This is from the same spot in 2008, where you can see the willow have taken over where the glacier used to be. It's a little, kind of in a little corner up there. Now, we were there last summer. The glaciers have about 10 to 15 years left, but they're going fast. Go quick if you want to see them. And as Bob Schuster's saying, not as many people are arguing about climate change as I used to get. So I got to the coast at Walport, Oregon. One of the things you discover is like I came over the bend in Idaho, and it's like, there it is, my last state. Oregon is really lumpy. There were like about 5 passes I still had to go in Oregon before I finally kind of came around the corner. If you read Steinbeck, he talks about being able to smell the ocean from the passes in Travels with Charlie. It's like, no, that doesn't happen. But you still can smell the ocean a long time before you actually see it. So I got to dip my tire in the other ocean, and probably the one thing I remember from looking at the picture is how white my feet were. I got a pretty good tan on my legs, but nothing on the feet. And the other.
They look like socks.
Yeah, it does. There wasn't. The tan was not very well distributed. You can almost see a little piece from this last ride. I don't know. It's almost obscured. But I remember one day looking down at my hands, and it's like, wow, I got a black spot on my hand. It's like, oh wait, I got a black spot on my other hand too. It's like that's the hole from the bicycle glove. But I also carried with me, that was sort of like my talisman, was they had a nickel that was put out on the 200th anniversary of Lewis and Clark. I was following Lewis and Clark for a lot of the way, and on the nickel is the entry from William Clark's journal, where he says, "Ocean in view, oh the joy." So that was one of my talismans. So a couple of takeaways. I mentioned about connecting the dots. Sometimes I see in a lot of the environmental literature about climate change, it's really the end of the world. I kind of think about the scene in Ghostbusters where where he's saying earthquakes, volcanoes, the dead rising from the grave. It's not quite like that, but I see climate change as not the end of the world, but beginning of a very different one. From the east, you see broken up barrier islands, east and Gulf Coast, that the way sea level rise will manifest itself is you get overwashed barrier islands, you get new inlets being created. Ultimately, they start looking like Swiss cheese, like this Fowler Beach island that I was on, and that there is way too much coast to protect. A side effect is that the National Flood Insurance Program that we have is not going to survive. That ultimately taxpayers are not going to be able to come up with enough money to rebuild houses over and over again as they get washed away. We will have more Sandies, as I mentioned. That will be what climate change looks like, and people will say, "Oh, that's a terrible natural disaster." It's like, no, you can see this coming. It will be happening. There will be another Great Plains drought. You can pretty much count on it. The Dust Bowl was relatively easy in historical terms, even without anthropogenic climate change. We can expect from the paleoclimate record mega droughts, and that climate change tends to tilt things towards drought, especially in the southern plains. In the west, I didn't mention it, but you can see going across the Cascades, they have long had their reservoirs in the sky. That in the Sierras and the Cascades, these are the places where water gets stored for the summertime. That's what's providing the flow in the rivers in the summertime. And despite what was a record snowpack season this year that broke the California drought, in the long term, snowpack in the western mountains is declining. And you're starting to get these hard choices between, do we keep water flow in the rivers for salmon, for hydropower, for irrigation, for municipal uses. This is happening now. Those conflicts are going to become more intense because of the loss of these reservoirs in the sky. High mountain forests are something that we are losing very rapidly. You can also look at things that I didn't see, like coral reefs. An awful lot of coral reefs are not going to survive climate change, almost regardless of what we do now. Polar ecosystems will be, have been, and will be taking a pounding. You can also expect the unexpected. We were, I don't think 30 years ago anybody anticipated bugs, that bugs would be a major impact of climate change, that these mountain pine beetles would be, they've always been endemic in the mountain regions, but they're going to be coming up fast, and that diseases that may be associated with those bugs will be happening. One of the things that's often pointed out is that the tropics are basically expanding, and you say, well, this might mean that the domain for malaria will be expanding. People point to Singapore that says Singapore is right on the equator, has malaria all around it, but malaria is almost unknown within Singapore because they have a very good public health system. They have a very good infrastructure. So it doesn't necessarily mean because climate change, things like dengue and malaria are going to expand, but we're going to have to pay attention to infrastructure for that. Nonlinear effects, what I mean by that is there's nothing that says climate change is going to be linear, that we are not going to see jumps in the system, that ice loss is necessarily going to be a linear process, that sea level rise is going to be a linear process. And the other thing that a lot of you are familiar with, they're going, at some point, it's very clear we can't burn all of the carbon that we have in the ground. That will be utterly catastrophic. And at some point, make it now, make it later, people are going to say, we need to put a carbon tax, we need to reduce the amount that's coming from the ground. That means that there will be stranded assets. The things that a lot of the oil and gas and coal companies are basing their value on will be not worth anything. And that has some profound implications for the system. I mentioned sort of this this case for hope. On the national scene, I would use the phrase that our president uses all the time: it's a disaster. We are seeing an awful lot of the things that were built over many, many years getting taken apart very quickly. That's all true. But you look around and you say, internationally, leadership on climate is passing to China and to Europe. China is realizing that they have tremendous air pollution problems just from burning coal, and they have some very good reasons to go towards renewable energy. And they are making that move, whether we do it or not. Europe has long been a leader on climate change. This mantle will be passing to them certainly over the next couple of years. On the state and local fronts, there are a lot of optimistic things that are happening. As I mentioned, the fracking ban is a big deal. We're, at least in Maryland, going to keep that particular part of carbon equation in the ground. It got almost no attention, but the District of Columbia has divested its pension plans from fossil fuels. In Montgomery County, a group that I work with, 350 MoCo, together with a number of our partners within Sierra Club, within Chesapeake Climate Action Network, are pushing real hard to get Montgomery County to sell its assets in fossil fuels, and I think we've got some reason to say we'll make some progress. It may well happen this next week. Renewable energy, despite whatever happens in coming back, is accelerating. The costs of solar and wind energy are dropping very quickly. You drive across or ride across Iowa, there are some vast windmill installations. The biggest wind producer in the U.S. is Texas. So right now, just this last week, by market cap, the #1 U.S. car company is Tesla. What? It's like, but they've hardly made any cars yet. And what that's saying is the market thinks this is where the future is. That electric cars are going to be a going concern. Last week, the wind energy industry topped 100,000 jobs. That's way more than the coal industry now. So things are changing, and to my mind, what we need to do is to just keep giving it a shove. There's a lot of discussion on personal actions. You know, what you can personally do to fight climate change, and it's important. I ride my bike a lot. I drive a hybrid, and all that good stuff. And that is necessary, but not sufficient. Sometimes there's sort of a greener than thou thing among the environmental community that's not necessarily all that helpful. What I say is I'd like to have my own personal energy consumption kind of like the level of the Europeans, which is still a lot less than the States. But it's what we really need to do is to put pressure on the political system. The idea that we need to have roughly 80% of the discovered fossil fuels to stay in the ground. I put on here a distant analog of abolition. There was a fascinating article that Chris Hayes wrote about a year or so ago, comparing the amount of money that was invested in slavery before the Civil War. And adjusted for inflation, it's roughly the same amount that's in the fossil fuel industry. And this is not to draw moral equivalence between the two, but just saying the order of the issue is the same. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, that took a civil war to change things. What chance do we have against the entrenched interests of the fossil fuel industry? But the Achilles heel here really is the fact that to explore for oil and gas, and for coal for that matter, but exploration for fossil fuels is an enormously expensive business. They need steady inflow of capital to drill, especially to drill in places like the offshore. If the whole Canadian tar sands is a fabulously expensive business. If it can be made that investing in that business is not a respectable thing to do, that's kind of what divestment is all about. That if we can keep start to slow the flow of capital towards the oil and gas industry, it actually starts happening very fast. That people say, oh, wait a minute, if in 10 years my investment in oil company X is going to be going down, I don't want to put my money there, I will put it someplace else. And people say, well, Montgomery County divestment, that's like a drop in the bucket, and it is. But the symbolic idea of if more and more places, like the government of Norway, like the Rockefeller Fund, start divesting, and the market starts to realize, oh, this is not a good place to put the money, things start changing real fast. What I'd ask is, and obviously from the show of hands, I would advocate pushing for a future that hums and whirs rather than burns. The groups like Sierra Club, like Chesapeake Climate Action Network that I'm involved in, that the Montgomery County 350 group are ways that we can push the system towards this. And as a lot of you saw, I would say, start or continue things next Saturday at the Climate March, or if you were at the march yesterday, that's good too. And anyway, I also mentioned that there's a book. This is what the cover looks like coming out on the 6th of June from Pegasus and all that stuff. And there's an actual homemade website there that I put this up the other day, and this is kind of classic of what your kids do to each other. My daughter says, "Oh, great website, Dad," and I said, "Well, actually, your mom and your brother really did most of the work on this." And half an hour, like minutes later, below it, her brother says, "MVP child, take that, Laura." So, okay, that's good. So anyway, I wanted to thank you folks for the chance to speak today. I really enjoyed it.
Some questions? I think we have, let me see, what time is it? 11:20. Yeah, we're going to leave a little time for the results of the raffle, but I think we have some time for questions or comments, or you could also ask questions about the ride up the Mississippi Delta if you have that question as well.
In the back
Thank you
first.
so much. It was really very entertaining and also insightful. So on your to-do list, which a lot of, as you know, you're speaking to a community that's very active, and a lot of us have already done a lot of this, or are trying to. There seems to be like there's a big disconnect between what's going on in our government and what people like us want to do. So, how do we, I guess, what is it going to take to be able to get our government to notice us? I mean, we'll be out there marching, but what is it going to take? And the second part of the question is, on your route, as you saw, you showed several different examples of how climate is impacting places. Are you also seeing people there responding in a positive way to changing the climate? In other words, taking action. So, first of all, what is it going to take? And second, did you see kind of something on your way, on your route, that is not about?
First question is easy, piece of cake, right? How do you change the government? I don't know. You try and raise your voice. For me, I had this kind of naive notion when I started across. It's like, I kind of see climate as a science problem. That was my whole career, and that maybe I could just talk to people about it. I mean, there's a line out of my highbrow pursuits, line out of Animal House that says, "This calls for a stupid and futile gesture on someone's part, and I'm just the guy to do it." So, I was thinking, just talk to people, and it actually turns out to be not an easy thing to do, because people. And again, I was in small town America. I would take a wild guess that most of the people I was talking with that, turned into a good part of the base for Donald Trump, and that you could talk about how the weather is changing, about the drought, about all of the impacts of climate, but once you use the C word, it was like whoop. People kind of closed down. I had an encounter in Kansas with a lady at the motel, and I was signing in. I said, "No, I'm riding across. What are you doing?" I'm talking about climate, and she said, "Do you know Al Gore?" I said, "Well, actually, no. I sat in on a couple of his hearings when he was a senator, but it was a funny kind of diversion because Gore is kind of, has long been kind of a boogeyman on, because, in part sometimes he could seem and be pretty sanctimonious, and that obviously got under people's skin. So it's like when you talk about climate, you must be talking about the former vice president, who has done quite a lot, frankly. But but it's almost like I think people in the back of their head realize things are changing, but an awful lot of it is, you could almost summarize it in the word flyover, of where the people on the coast think the folks in the middle are kind of folks that don't matter or need to be told what to do, and I think there was a pretty strong pushback from that. In some ways, there's going to be this political pendulum swinging that's happening, and we're on a pretty extreme side of that. I don't know necessarily how to change things other than getting out in the street, getting a few wins under our belt. I had another friend of mine who was from France who spent a lot of time writing in the U.S. He just he's kind of trying to calm me down. He said, you know, I believe in America. I believe that people will figure this out, and I think he's probably right. It may just take a while that will change. So, you had a question first? Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking about all those dead forests, which I know my travels in the West are far less extensive than yours, of course, but I've seen them, and I'm wondering, they're going to burn. All that dead wood standing there has to burn, and so I'm thinking, then obviously when a forest burns, then there's all this succession of other species that follow. I'm wondering if there were tree species that are resistant to these borer beetles, whatever they are, that might come in behind.
Yeah, what's the succession?
Yeah.
What you see, I think the case study is Yellowstone. I mean, the big firestorm in Yellowstone in 1988, and there are smaller, younger trees. When I rode through Yellowstone, there are trees like 7 and 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
And you know, you realize, oh wow, these guys have been growing since 1988,
Right.
and in the Northern Rockies, it's just a real short growing season, so it's a slow process. The younger trees tend to be more resistant to the beetles. There's any guess, you tend to suspect that as they get bigger, they'll get infested again. That it may be something similar to the chestnut blight. When the American chestnuts were lost, when the blight was introduced in the 1920s, chestnut used to be the dominant forest in the eastern U.S., and you still see chestnuts in the forest. There are young chestnuts; they just never get old, never get all that old. I don't know what species are necessarily resistant to the bugs. The aspens seem to have their own issues, and aspen are only up to a certain level. You definitely see in some places that in the dead forest that there are new shoots that are around. It isn't necessarily true that the dead forests burn.
Oh, really?
Actually, if you've got a dry forest that still has lots of needles on the trees, that forest is more likely to burn. The real spectacular fires are what they call the running crown fires, where the fire is all up high and getting blown across in dry needles, and it's like, talking to the firefighters is like, you can't outrun one of those. They go much faster than you can run. You just, you have to find shelter someplace. Anyway, yes.
Keep getting letters from the utilities asking, do we want to pay more to get 100% of our energy from wind and non-common sources? Do you know how much of a trend that is, and whether that is actually having any significant effect in terms of replacing the sources that the utilities are using for energy?
I've gotten those letters. I've signed up for wind power as well. You can see, and actually a lot of the wind energy that we get here comes from Pennsylvania. There are a number of fairly sizable wind farms in Pennsylvania. The actual effect on replacing power for the utility, I don't necessarily have the numbers on that, but wind energy is going up fast. I mean, in Wyoming, the biggest energy source, it's funny, you go into Gillette, Wyoming, it's like energy capital of the US, and on one side is coal, and the other side is the atom, because Wyoming used to be a big uranium producer. Well, uranium's gone, coal has pretty seriously tanked, but the southern part of Wyoming along the I-80 corridor is one of the windiest places in the country. There are big wind projects going up in Wyoming that apparently have the infrastructure to get that to major energy markets like the Denver metropolitan area. So in a lot of places, it is replacing fossil fuels. When I first went through Kansas, and I was thinking, I can tell you firsthand, there's a lot of wind in Kansas, very reliable. I'd just about kill me. And when I went through, it was like I saw one wind farm the whole way, and I saw a lot of these old style, wind-driven water pumps that were, from years ago. And it's like, okay, you guys knew, once you knew how to handle the wind, why aren't you doing it now? Well, in the years since I've been riding across, there has been an enormous upsurge in wind energy in Kansas. There are wind projects going up like crazy.
There's the offshore. Do you want to mention the offshore wind?
Yeah, I mean there's the new offshore farm in off Nantucket is coming online, and in Maryland there has been a bill a couple of years ago to promote offshore wind in Maryland off the Delmarva coast. Mark knows a little more.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, and Dave might want to add, but the issue is the facility is actually beyond state water, so it's in federal water, so it has permission from the federal government, but the issue is that it needs certain financial support through a system in Maryland, and that has to get approved through the Public Service Commission, and that hearing is going on right now, and there'll be a decision. They have like a 90-day period, so we'll have a definite decision, I think, in May. There are two different companies that are competing. One would be a much smaller project, one would be a much larger project, though it's also possible that the PSC could deny it completely on the claim that, well, it might raise your energy bill a small amount, and that the whole idea of any current increase is something that Governor Hogan and those people who are associated with him think is just the worst thing in the world, that you might pay 5 or 10 cents more over a year, because that's his basic campaign platform is, no tax, reduced taxes, no matter what. And when the bill was passed to allow for the PSC to do this, there were all of the appointees on the PSC were appointed by O'Malley, so it was viewed as something that wouldn't be a big issue. You could write a very general bill, leave it to those appointees to figure it out, and we'll have a good result. Well, now it's supposed to be 5 people, one just resigned, so there's 3 of the 4 people on the PSC are appointees from Governor Hogan. One, for example, is a former delegate named Anthony O'Donnell who voted against the wind bill when he was in the legislature. So that's sort of the approach. So we'll get a decision soon. I don't know if Dave wants to.
No, actually, that was pretty good. I actually would make a comment. You asked about the 100% wind and that kind of stuff. Actually, a lot of that's driven by state policies, renewable portfolio standards, and in this past year, the legislature in Maryland just overrode Hogan's veto of the increase in the renewable portfolio standard in Maryland. So, a lot of the states are doing that. It's a good thing that's happening. I actually wanted to follow up on what you're just mentioning about, certain parts of the country you went through. Kansas, for example, you showed, the turbines from Iowa. By the way, if you want to see about close and you want to do a bike ride, do Bike Ride. That's the
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bike ride across Iowa. It happens every year, and you can see and you can get find the weirdness in Iowa. But my question was more along the lines of riding through Kansas, riding through the coal country in Wyoming. Just curious, you mentioned people, about women outdoor. Did you get any sense of people of feeling entrenchment or any kind of hope for the future in terms of, the future in terms of climate and that type of stuff?
I think the some of the folks I talked to in Kansas, agriculture is very big in Kansas. A lot of what they were talking about is, was almost like surviving this drought. That, my yield is down like 50%, and that you got to get, they say you got to get big to survive. And with the money I'm paying for pumps, they're pumping water out of the ground, and to John Deere, that's getting tougher and tougher to do. So these are folks that are used to big swings in climate, and they, I wouldn't say they necessarily know how to handle it, but when the droughts come, they can get pounded in the same way as happened during the Dust Bowl. Sometimes it's like you would overhear things that you would hear on talk radio. I remember, there were some big rains as I was coming through Indiana, and one of the guys say, not going to be able to get planted this week or next. It looks, it just looks nasty. And he said, oh yeah, you ought to get into that climate change business. I hear there's lots of government grants you can get. It's like, and I'm going, oh, okay. So everything's, all the climate scientists are on the take, right? That's sort of the tune. But like anything else, it varies. Going through Moscow, Idaho, were some people that were very attuned to what was going on in climate. It's not necessarily a monolithic point of view that climate is some kind of a grand conspiracy.
I was asking Idaho because that's Ruby Ridge.
Yeah.
It's a militia country.
Maybe we could have one more question, and then we have to get to our raffle. So you could fight it out between the two of you, or maybe you can merge your question. Ellen and Ruth.
What are your questions?
What are your questions? Say them both, and maybe we can merge them together.
Okay, my question is, I recently read something or heard something about extraction of water from the air. Some new technology. Do you know anything about that? Is that something that would
And what was your
So my question was, I went to college with one of my friends in college was Deborah Popper, and she and her husband Frank Popper are the ones who did the turning the Great Plains back into.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you had encountered any of the people, because they went through an experience where the farmers hated them in the beginning and then caught on to the fact that, yes, the Great Plains need to be restored to grazing area and the farming has to stop, and the farmers joined in with that cause after a number of years. And I wondered if you saw any of that kind of agreement that the natural ecosystem is the one we need to go back to in order to save the earth. And that was
The first question first. I'd seen the note about the extraction of water from the air. I actually don't know much about it. My wife will tell you that I'm very quick to expound on all kinds of things that I don't know anything about. But in this case, I won't. As far as the return of the plains, I mean, I can see where you get a lot of pushback. People make their living from farming in much of the Great Plains. There are pieces of the prairie still left. There's a place called the Tallgrass Prairie Reserve in Kansas, which is magical. You have these prairies that, the grass grows up about this high, and the roots are way bigger than that. They burn every couple of years. It used to be that the Pawnee would burn them. Now it's a controlled burn. Even before that, it used to be lightning strikes. And what would happen is the grass would burn, the roots are still fine, and these green shoots would come up, and that would attract the buffalo. And there are still bison all through this tall grass prairie reserve. I'm still not sure you would get necessarily a lot of people saying we ought to write off agriculture in the Great Plains. There's, it's still a very productive area, whether not necessarily the small mom and pop farms anymore, but
I think they talked about Buffalo Commons.
the Buffalo Commons, right?
I think we have to, it's
Would you
great.
stay and take the, pick the winners?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Dave, when are you gonna be